The Galactic Academy of Interstellar Minds stood as the pinnacle of higher learning in the Milky Way, its elegant spires rising above the surface of PX9, a planet renowned for its breathtaking crystal skies and low-gravity environment. It was here that the brightest minds from countless species gathered, advancing fields from artificial gravity to dark matter theory. The Academy's corridors echoed with ideas that stretched the limits of known science, a place where even the most sophisticated civilizations could only dream of reaching. Emma Reynolds, a young human from Earth, stepped through the towering glass gates of the Academy, her heart racing. Earth, classified as a developing world by the Galactic Alliance, had only recently begun sending students off-planet, and humans were still a rare sight in this prestigious institution. Of the 3 humans accepted that year, Emma was determined to prove she belonged. Despite her impressive academic record, among the top 5% in a pool of interstellar applicants, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was carrying the weight of her entire species on her shoulders. The hallway buzzed with energy as Emma made her way toward the physics wing. Alien students of every shape, color, and form filled the corridors, each a living testament to the diversity of the galaxy. A towering Xylon, their shimmering scales reflecting the ambient light, brushed past her, followed by a group of Narian students whose bioluminescent patterns flickered in soft pulses as they spoke quietly among themselves. Emma overheard fragments of their conversation. Though their words were indistinguishable, their sidelong glances and soft chuckles were clear enough. She could feel their scrutiny, but she refused to let it show. She had earned her place here, and nothing was going to take that from her. As she approached the lecture hall for advanced quantum mechanics, Emma took a deep breath. The hall was enormous, its spherical design ensuring every student had a perfect view of the holographic projections at the front. She stepped inside, and a hushed silence fell over the room. Hundreds of eyes turned to her, their gazes reflecting curiosity, skepticism, or even amusement. Emma kept her head down, focused on finding an empty seat near the middle. At the front of the room stood Professor Zero, a towering figure with translucent skin that seemed to glow softly in the dim light. Her elongated head and 7-fingered hands gave her an almost otherworldly presence, and her reputation as one of the galaxy's greatest intellectuals made her both feared and admired. Zero was known for her unyielding strictness and her open disdain for lesser species. Humans, in particular, were often the target of her derision. Emma's entrance did not go unnoticed. Zero's glowing eyes swept over the room, pausing on Emma for a brief moment. The faintest smirk tugged at the corners of the professor's lips, as if Emma's presence was an amusing, if not entirely unexpected, development. So, Zero began, her voice resonating through the lecture hall like a low, almost melodic hum. "We have a new addition to our class this cycle, a human." She lingered on the word human, stretching it as if it were a curious oddity. A few students chuckled, their laughter echoing softly. Emma's cheeks flushed, but she kept her expression neutral, refusing to show any weakness. "Miss Reynolds, is it?" Zero continued, her elongated finger pointing toward Emma. "I trust Earth's rudimentary educational system has adequately prepared you for the demands of this course?" Emma's heart sank at the implication, but she met Zero's gaze without faltering. "I believe it has, Professor," she replied, her voice calm and unwavering. A murmur spread across the room. It wasn't common for a student to respond so boldly to Zero's veiled insults. Zero's head tilted slightly, a deeper smirk creeping across her face. "We shall see," she said, and then she turned to the lecture, diving into the intricacies of multidimensional quantum fields. Holographic projections materialized before them, swirling with equations and dynamic models that seemed to defy understanding. Most of the students were absorbed in their hollow devices, typing furiously or whispering among themselves in an attempt to keep up with the rapid-fire explanations. Emma, however, was completely engrossed. The equations reminded her of a similar problem she had worked on back home, involving gravitational wave interference. Without realizing it, she began scribbling in her notebook, making connections that astonished even her. As the lecture progressed, Emma became aware of the heavy scrutiny on her. Each time she raised her hand with a question, the room fell silent, every student eager to see how the human would embarrass herself. But her questions were thoughtful and precise, earning reluctant nods from some of her peers. Still, Zero's cold, calculating gaze remained fixed on her, as if waiting for her to make a mistake. As the session neared its end, Zero turned to face the class, her expression unreadable. "For our next session," she said, "we'll be exploring the implications of quantum entanglement entanglement across interdimensional planes. To prepare, I'll leave you with a challenge. With a simple flick of her wrist, a complex equation appeared in the air, glowing symbols shifting and pulsing as they danced in midair. A low hum filled the room as students murmured among themselves. This was far beyond the usual level of their assignments. Miss Reynolds, Zero called, her voice cutting through the noise with razor-sharp precision. Since you've assured us of your readiness, perhaps you'd like to solve it now? The room fell silent, all eyes on Emma, her stomach clenched with unease. She hadn't had the time to fully process the equation, and Zero's challenge was clearly designed to trap her. Every gaze in the room was fixed on her, waiting for her to fail. Taking a deep breath, Emma stood. "I'll give it a try," she said, her voice calm despite the tight knot in her chest. As she approached the holographic board, the symbols seemed to swirl mockingly, as if daring her to solve them. Zero's smirk returned, and a few students exchanged knowing looks. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the control panel, but she forced herself to ignore the fear. Emma wasn't here to prove them wrong. She was here to prove to herself that she belonged. The silence in the lecture hall felt oppressive as she walked toward the holographic board. Each step seemed amplified, the sound echoing through the tense air. All eyes, both alien and human, were fixed on her, some with barely veiled amusement, others with curiosity, but most with the cold expectation that she would fail. Professor Zero stood at the front, watching intently, her glowing eyes narrowing with a hint of amusement. The smirk on her face was a clear signal. This was no ordinary problem. The equation projected before her was a work of art in complexity, a maze of shifting symbols and equations that hovered in midair like a living creature. Each line pulsed with faint light, and the symbols twisted and turned, adapting to Emma's perspective. It was a type of problem she had only ever read about in theoretical papers, multidimensional quantum field dynamics. While still in its infancy back on Earth, it was a well-established area of study in the galaxy. Emma's pulse quickened as she stood before the glowing equations. The problem seemed to mock her, its intricacies beyond what she had encountered in her studies. She glanced at Professor Zero, whose confident expression made it clear she expected Emma to fail. The murmurs of her classmates grew louder, and Emma caught bits of their conversation. "She won't last 5 minutes," a tall crystalline student muttered to a gelatinous companion who seemed to shift with amusement. "Why let humans in here at all?" another voice added, dripping with disdain. "She'll break under the pressure." "They always do." Emma breathed deeply, blocking out the noise. She focused on the equation, her mind shifting into analytical mode. She'd been taught one key principle during her Earth-based studies in math and physics. Any complex problem could be reduced to simpler parts. The key was to find the thread that bound it all together. Her fingers hovered over the holographic controls, and as they did, the symbols shifted in response. The interface was intuitive, but the problem itself was anything but. Emma's first instinct was to reduce the equation to a two-dimensional model, a technique she'd learned in her Earth courses. As she worked, faint lines of light traced across the board, forming a simplified diagram of the core variables. "Primitive methods," someone muttered. "She doesn't even get the dimensional flux," came another voice, thick with judgment. Emma didn't let it affect her. Each whisper only fueled her determination. She moved swiftly, breaking down the complex structure into manageable pieces, recognizing patterns where others saw only chaos. Slowly, the chaotic web of equations began to unravel in her mind, each part falling into place. Behind her, Professor Zero's smirk wavered slightly. She had expected the human to crumble immediately, to be overwhelmed by the problem, but Emma's focused, methodical approach suggested otherwise. Zero tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing further as she observed the human at work. "Fascinating," Professor Zero murmured to herself. Time stretched on, each minute feeling like an eternity as Emma continued her work. The weight of the room's scrutiny pressed down on her, the silence deafening. There were moments when she encountered sections of the equation that seemed to defy everything she knew, problems that bent Earth's mathematical rules, but she adapted quickly. She relied on her logic and intuition, combining everything she had learned on Earth with the new concepts she was starting to grasp at the academy. As Emma worked, a noticeable change began to ripple through the room. The murmurs around her faded, and the mocking smiles that had been there earlier started to disappear. Even the most skeptical students leaned forward, watching her more intently. The once chaotic symbols on the board began to align, forming a coherent structure that the more experienced students began to recognize. What had seemed like a hopeless effort was slowly becoming a legitimate solution. "Is she actually solving it?" one voice whispered, disbelief clear in the tone. "No way," another replied, voice thick with doubt. "That's impossible. She's just guessing." "If she's guessing, she's really good at it," a third voice added. Emma felt a rush of energy as the last pieces of the equation clicked into place. She adjusted the variables with precision, recalibrating until the symbols stopped shifting and began to settle into a steady, harmonious rhythm. The equation stabilized, its chaotic movements replaced by a clear, elegant pattern. The solution hung in the air before her, simple and beautiful, a stark contrast to the complexity of the original problem. The room fell silent. Emma stepped back, her hands shaking slightly as she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The glowing solution illuminated her face, and for a moment, she simply stared at it, in awe that she had actually done it. Turning to face the class, Emma saw that Professor Zero had not moved, her expression unreadable, her glowing eyes flickering as they studied the solution. Her translucent fingers lightly tapped against the podium. The room held its breath, waiting for the professor's verdict. After a long pause, Zero spoke, her voice as calm as ever, though with a subtle edge. "Impressive," she said, though the word seemed laced with reluctance. "Your solution is correct." Yet, she hesitated, letting the weight of her words settle. "Your method was unconventional, primitive even. You simplified variables that most advanced civilizations would not dare to touch." And yet, she gestured toward the glowing solution. It worked. A strange mix of pride and defiance surged within Emma. "Sometimes simplicity can reveal truths that complexity obscures," she replied, her voice steady. The room buzzed with low murmurs once again, but this time there was no ridicule, no whispers of mockery. Instead, the students spoke in quiet awe and, in some cases, respect. Zero studied Emma for a long moment before finally nodding. "You've earned your place in this class, Miss Reynolds. For now," Professor Zero said, her voice smooth and measured. She then turned to address the rest of the students. "Let this serve as a reminder. Even the most unexpected minds can offer valuable insights." As the students began to leave, Emma remained in her seat, her heart pounding with a mix of relief and triumph. She hadn't just solved a complex problem. She had taken the first step toward proving that humanity could belong among the stars. The room was unusually quiet as Emma made her way back to her seat. Those who had once whispered about her exchanged glances, their previous mockery replaced with stunned silence. Some of the more observant students were already pulling up their notes, trying to understand how a human, a species they had once considered inferior, could achieve what few others in the galaxy had. Emma could feel their eyes on her, heavy with disbelief and curiosity. She wanted nothing more than to sink into her seat, but the quiet confidence she now carried kept her upright. She had proven her worth in that moment. For the first time, Emma didn't feel like an outsider. Her solution was legitimate, and that alone mattered. However, she knew the hardest part was just beginning, earning respect in a system that had already decided she was less than the others. Professor Zero remained at the front of the room, her tall, translucent form bathed in the soft glow of Emma's solution. She stared at the board, her seven-fingered hands clasped behind her back, her expression unreadable. It was evident she hadn't anticipated this outcome. For a moment, she seemed to be lost in thought. Then, shaking off her surprise, Zero addressed the class again. "This exercise," she began, her voice cold and measured, "was not just about solving an equation. It was a test of perspective, of seeing beyond traditional methods and adapting to the unknown. Miss Reynolds has demonstrated that she can think beyond the limitations of her species." Her words, while meant to acknowledge Emma's success, carried a subtle implication. The idea that Emma's achievement was an anomaly, something rare and out of the ordinary, was unmistakable. Emma's grip tightened on her notebook, but she said nothing. She knew this was Zero's way of reminding the class that humanity still had much to prove. Zero continued, "There is one part of your solution that merits further discussion," she said, her tone carrying a hint of sharpness. Emma's stomach twisted. She had hoped the ordeal was over, but Zero's tone told her otherwise. Slowly, she stood and made her way to the front again, her movements steady and deliberate. Zero gestured to the holographic equation. "Your solution is accurate," she began, "but your method, simplifying the variables and recalibrating the constants, is, to put it mildly, unconventional. Why did you choose this approach?" Professor Zero asked, her voice cutting through the silence. Emma hesitated, unsure how to respond. In truth, she hadn't consciously chosen a method. It was more instinct than intention, drawing from the problem-solving skills she had developed on Earth. But she knew that explanation wouldn't be enough for Zero or the others. After a moment, she took a steadying breath and began. "On Earth," she started, keeping her voice even despite the tightness in her chest, "we often work with limitations, whether technological, computational, or even cultural. These limitations push us to think outside the box, to come up with solutions that aren't always immediately clear. When I saw this equation, I didn't view it as a problem to solve with brute force. I saw it as a system of interconnected interconnected parts, and I focused on simplifying those connections to reveal the core structure. Her words lingered in the air, and for a brief moment, the room remained silent. Then, much to Emma's surprise, a voice from the back of the room spoke up. "That's actually brilliant." Emma turned toward the sound and saw the tall crystalline alien who had spoken earlier. His shimmering form reflected the glow from the holographic equations, and he looked at her with genuine admiration, his multifaceted eyes studying her with newfound respect. Zero's expression didn't change, but her glowing eyes flickered slightly, a small sign of acknowledgement. "An interesting perspective," she said after a pause. "Though unconventional, there is merit in it. However, do not mistake success for mastery, Miss Reynolds. This is merely the beginning." Emma nodded, accepting the professor's words without argument. She returned to her seat, her heart still pounding from the intensity of the moment. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. While some students still looked at her skeptically, others now regarded her with curiosity, and in some cases, respect. It wasn't much, but it was a victory, and it felt like a breakthrough. The lecture ended soon after, and the students began to file out. Emma gathered her things quickly, eager to avoid any more attention, but just as she slung her bag over her shoulder, she felt a tap on her arm. Turning around, she saw the crystalline alien from earlier. Up close, his sharp features and reflective surface were even more striking. "Hey," he said, his voice soft and melodic, like the sound of a chime. "That was impressive." "I'm Emma," she replied, offering a small smile. "Kale," he said, tilting his head slightly. "How did you figure it out? That equation stumped even the top students last cycle." Emma hesitated, unsure of how to explain without sounding arrogant. "I just approached it differently," she said. "It reminded me of a problem I worked on back home, so I applied a similar method." Kale nodded thoughtfully. "Well, whatever you did, it worked. Don't let Zero's attitude get to you. She's tough on everyone, but she respects talent." "Thanks," Emma said, her smile widening. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find allies here. As Kale walked away, Emma noticed a few more students glancing her way. Some looked curious, while others seemed to regard her with a newfound respect. It was a subtle change, but it was enough to give Emma a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced before. That evening, as Professor Zero sat in her private quarters, reviewing the day's lecture, her thoughts were conflicted. The holographic projection of Emma's solution hovered before her, its glowing symbols casting faint shadows on the walls. Zero studied it closely, her mind racing. For years, she had seen humans as a curiosity, an emerging species with potential, but still far from the intellectual sophistication of the galaxy's elite. Yet Emma's performance had challenged that view. Her approach had been unorthodox, yes, but it revealed a level of creativity and adaptability that Zero seldom witnessed, even among the most advanced species. Perhaps, Zero murmured quietly to herself, "There is more to humanity than I thought." She tapped a control panel, saving the solution for further analysis. She decided that, for now, she would simply observe Emma. The human had solved one problem, but the true test would come in the weeks to follow. Zero was determined to see whether Emma's success was a fluke or the beginning of something more significant. The following weeks at the Galactic Academy were a blur for Emma. Her unexpected success in Professor Zero's class had drawn more attention than she was comfortable with. The students who had mocked her on the first day now either avoided her or cautiously approached her, eager to discuss ideas with her. While small victories like Kale's praise were reassuring, Emma quickly realized that respect came with its own set of challenges and higher expectations. Zero, however, remained distant and cold. She neither praised nor scolded Emma in class, yet Emma felt the professor's eyes on her more than anyone else's. It was as if Zero was watching, waiting for her to stumble and prove that her initial success had been nothing more than a lucky accident. Then one day, Professor Zero announced a special project, a practical test designed to push the students to apply everything they had learned so far. The task was a multivariable quantum dynamics problem, meant not only to test their knowledge but to challenge their ability to think creatively under pressure. What made this test unique was that the pairs would be assigned by Zero herself. Emma's heart dropped when she saw her partner's name on the list. Sorth, the tall insectoid alien, had been one of her harshest critics since she arrived. He had never bothered to hide his disdain for humans, often dismissing her questions or comments in class with derisive clicks of his mandibles. The assignment began in a massive spherical simulation chamber. Each pair was given a unique scenario, tasked with stabilizing a quantum field on the verge of collapse. The fields were unpredictable, with their variables shifting rapidly as the students interacted with them. Success demanded not only precision but also flawless teamwork. When Emma and Sorth entered their assigned chamber, the tension between them was thick in the air. "Let me make this clear," Sorth said, his voice clicking with annoyance. I won't let your primitive methods ruin my performance. Stay out of my way and we'll finish this. Emma gritted her teeth but nodded, choosing not to engage. She wasn't here to argue. She was here to prove she could handle the challenge. The simulation began, and the quantum field materialized before them, a swirling mass of equations, glowing symbols, and unstable energy. Sorth immediately took control, quickly entering precise calculations. Emma stepped back, watching his approach. He was clearly skilled, but his rigid reliance on conventional techniques left no room for flexibility. As the simulation grew more chaotic, his methods started to fail. This isn't working, Emma said, stepping forward. Sorth shot her a sharp look. Stay out of it. I've got this. No, you don't, Emma replied, her voice steady. She pointed to the rapidly shifting variables in the holographic field. The system is changing too quickly for you to keep up. If we keep forcing it, it'll collapse. Sorth hesitated, his mandibles clicking in irritation. And what do you suggest, human? Emma inhaled deeply. We need to simplify the system. Find the core variables and focus on stabilizing those. It's risky, but it's our best shot. After a long pause, Sorth finally stepped back, giving a reluctant nod. Fine, but if this fails, it's your responsibility. Emma wasted no time diving into the calculations, her mind working furiously as she applied the same unorthodox approach she had used in the past. The stakes were higher now, the complexity of the simulation pushing her to her limits. The instability of the quantum field increased with every passing second, but Emma stayed calm, guided by her instincts. As she worked, she noticed Sorth watching her intently. Initially, his expression was skeptical, but as the field began to stabilize under her adjustments, his attitude shifted. Slowly, he began to assist her, his own calculations supporting hers in a way that surprised both of them. For the first time, Emma and Sorth were functioning as a team. The quantum field finally stabilized, its chaotic turbulence giving way to a steady, harmonious glow. A soft chime echoed through the chamber, signaling the end of the simulation as the holographic interface powered down. They stood there for a moment, catching their breath in silence. We did it, Emma said, her voice filled with quiet relief. Sorth clicked his mandibles, his usual arrogance now replaced with something closer to respect. Your methods are unconventional, but they work. Perhaps humans aren't as primitive as I believed. Emma allowed herself a small smile. Thanks. You weren't so bad yourself. When the results were announced, Emma and Sorth's team was revealed to have achieved the highest score, with near-perfect stabilization of the quantum field. The rest of the class buzzed with surprise, and even Professor Zero's usual impassive expression shifted slightly as she reviewed their performance. By the end of the day, Emma found herself called to Professor Zero's office. The room was cold and minimalistic, with sleek panels glowing softly, displaying complex equations and streams of scientific data. Zero sat behind a transparent desk, her glowing eyes fixed on Emma as she entered. Miss Reynolds, Zero began, her voice impossible to read. Your performance today was unexpected. Emma stayed silent, unsure whether this was a compliment or a critique. Zero leaned forward just a fraction, her gaze sharp. You've shown an ability to think beyond the limits of your species, she said. Your success in the simulation wasn't by chance. It was ingenuity, a trait often overlooked in this institution. Emma met Zero's gaze, her confidence swelling. Thank you, Zero nodded slowly. However, don't mistake this for the end of your challenges. If anything, your success will make your path here harder. I understand, Emma replied, her voice firm, and I'm ready. For a moment, Zero studied her in silence. Then, to Emma's surprise, the professor's lips twitched upward, just barely, in a smile. We shall see. As Emma left the office, a clarity settled within her that she hadn't felt since arriving at the academy. She had faced doubts, proven her worth, and earned her place, not just in the eyes of others, but in her own. Her journey wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt genuinely prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. Outside, the crystal spires of the academy sparkled under the twin suns of PX9, a stunning reminder of the vast galaxy waiting for her. Emma smiled. This was only the beginning.